New York was a city of electric life, but inside the restaurant, the music of the Sicilian orchestra drowned out the world. Amidst the clatter of plates, two figures wound their way toward the exit, drawing every eye. One was Reginald Clark. He had the smile of a conqueror, a touch of silver in his dark hair, and the bearing of a Roman cardinal. Beside him walked a young man, Ernest Fielding, whose lucid eyes betrayed the soul of a poet and a dreamer. As they left, a woman with sea-blue eyes watched them. This was Ethel Brandenborg. Years ago, she had been a brilliant artist under Clark's influence. But since he had cast her aside, her work had become a mere shadow of her former self, colorless and hollow. Rumors whispered they had once been married, others said he had simply drained the genius from her brush. Reginald Clark was a master of words. His conversational power was legendary, and his writing style held the rugged music of the Elizabethans. For young Ernest, the chance to live under the same roof as such a giant was a dream come true. "I shall expect you tomorrow at 4, Clark said, his voice deep and melodious. Ernest's heart leaped. He was proud to interest such a man. But as he watched Clark walk away into the night, he didn't realize that he was being drawn toward a masterful force that would soon claim every fiber of his body. Weeks passed in Clark's luxurious studio overlooking the Hudson. The room was filled with strange artifacts, a satyr whispering to a saint, the busts of Shakespeare and Balzac towering in the semi-darkness. A man's genius, Clark once told him, is his ability to absorb from life the elements essential to his completion. He spoke of how Shakespeare took his colors from many palettes. Ernest listened, entranced, feeling that their minds were traveling the same roads. But a shadow began to fall over the house. Ernest remembered a boy named Abel Felton, another protege of Clark's. One afternoon, Ernest overheard their final goodbye. "It is all gone," the boy had sobbed. "Nonsense," Clark replied with a hard, metallic voice. "There is no room in one house for two nervous people." When Ernest met Abel at the door, he asked about the book Abel was writing. "I am not writing it," Abel said with a sad smile. "Reginald is." Ernest didn't understand then. He was too busy with his own new project, a play he had conceived after a night out with his friend Jack. It was to be a masterpiece, The Princess with the Yellow Veil. The ideas were vivid, real, and pulsing in his brain. Yet, as the days grew longer, Ernest began to feel a strange exhaustion. His thoughts seemed to run away from him whenever he tried to write them down. He felt a physical travail in the mere act of thinking. Meanwhile, Clark was working in a white heat, claiming he was modeling a vessel of molten gold. The night of Clark's reception arrived. The studio was packed with New York's elite. Clark took his seat on a fur-covered throne under a crimson canopy. A hush fell as he unfolded his manuscript. As Clark began to read, a cold shudder ran through Ernest's frame. Every word, every scene, every character was his. The Mad King, the Queen Mother, and his own Princess Marigold. "Jack," Ernest whispered to his friend, his voice trembling. "That is my play." "You're mad," Jack replied. "You haven't even written a line of it yet." It was true. Ernest had not put a single word to paper. How could Clark be reading a manuscript of thoughts that had only existed in Ernest's mind? He felt as if a double were grinning at him from the dark. When the reading ended, the audience was silent, struck by the genius of the work. But Ernest lay back, his brow covered in cold sweat. The next morning, Clark was sympathetic. He called it a curious psychical phenomenon. He suggested Ernest was suffering from a nervous collapse, neurasthenia. "You have overworked yourself," Clark said gently. "Go to the seashore. Leave your brain behind." Ernest fled to Atlantic City, where the sun and sea began to heal his spirit. It was there he reconnected with Ethel Brandenborg. Ethel saw the change in him, the pinched face, the nervous twitch. She knew the signs. She warned him that Clark was brilliant and corrupted, an influence that would distort his soul like a hunchback Japanese tree. Ernest defended his mentor. "He has never sought to influence me," he insisted. But when he returned to New York, the nightmares began again. He felt a hand, a well-formed, manicured hand reaching into his skull at night, groping through the convolutions of his brain. Every time a new idea began to form, the dream hand clutched it and took it away. He was a human gold mine being stripped of its riches, and each nugget of gold was a thought. Ethel, moved by a prophetic unrest, came to the house on Riverside Drive while Clark was out. She found Ernest in a leaden, death-like sleep. When he woke, she told him the story of her own meeting with Clark, a meeting where the master had finally confessed his secret. "I have the power of absorbing the color of my environment," Clark had told her. He spoke of vampire souls that didn't take blood, but soul stuff. He admitted that the color vanishing from Ethel's canvases had reappeared in his prose. He needed Ernest's youth, his ideas, his creative urge. "Do you know who your tormentor is?" Ethel cried to the boy. Ernest sobbed, the truth finally breaking through his denial. "Reginald, a vampire." It seemed so ludicrous, in the shadow of the Flatiron Building. But Ethel looked him in the eyes. "The world is becoming mysterious again," she said. "The terrors of the old days have come back in a modern guise." Ernest stood in the center of the room, looking at the door. He was a poet whose songs were being stolen before they could even be sung, caught in the grip of a giant who built his palace with the stones of other men's fancies. Reginald Clark returned to the studio that evening to find Ethel and Ernest waiting like ghosts in the dim light of the Hudson sunset. He did not appear angry. Instead, he draped himself in his accustomed seat, his voice flowing like honeyed wine as he attempted to weave a web of words around the young poet once more. He spoke of the divine light of the masters to take what they needed from the lesser spirits, framing his theft as a form of immortality for Ernest's ideas. Ernest felt the familiar, heavy lethargy creeping over his limbs, a physical weight that threatened to pin him to the chair. Clark's eyes seemed to grow larger and darker, drawing the very air out of the room. "You are a part of me, Ernest," Clark whispered, his voice vibrating with a magnetic force. "Without me, your thoughts are but formless mist. Through me, they become marble and gold." It was Ethel who shattered the trance. She stepped between the two men, her sea-blue eyes flashing with a light that Clark could not absorb. "He is not a muse, Reginald, he is a man," she cried, grabbing Ernest by the arm and forcing him to stand. The physical contact broke the psychological circuit Clark had established. With a sudden, violent burst of energy, Ernest lunged for the door. He felt as if he were tearing his own skin away from the walls of the house. Clark did not chase them, he merely stood by the window, a silhouette of silver and shadow, watching them flee into the cold New York night. He knew that while Ernest had escaped with his life, the soul stuff already taken could never be returned. The story closes on a somber, haunting note. Ernest Fielding survived, but the vibrant, lucid dreamer who had entered the house was gone. He lived on as a quiet, pale shadow of a man, his creative fire extinguished, unable to ever write the play that Clark had already published to worldwide acclaim. Reginald Clark, meanwhile, remained the darling of the literary world. The vampire of New York sat in his high studio, his genius refreshed and his pockets full, quietly watching the streets below for the next young, brilliant soul to cross his threshold. The modern world, the narrator warns, is full of such predators, men who don't want your blood, but your very essence.